The next in list.
Next one. Pseudo-spirituality panders to fear and grief.
So what would be the opposite to pandering to fear and grief? Yes, but let's define it more. So the comment that was made, and by the way, please use the microphones, because the trouble is that anybody listening to this can hear. So what was the comment?
Just unconditional love.
It does. So let's be more specific about what that does with regard to fear. So how does that relate to fear? What would we say true spirituality does with fear?
Acceptance.
So firstly, does it accept fear?
No.
It drives out fear, right? So what could we say there? It confronts fear. Is that a good way of saying it? So it confronts fear?
I was going to say it recognises fear for what it is, not an all-encompassing thing, but just an emotion you need to release.
Exactly, it's just an emotion. So It's false expectations appearing real, and it recognises that. It doesn't honour fear. So quite oftentimes I see people still honouring fear. And when I say honouring fear, what I mean by that is they give you all the explanations in the world as to why they should still stay in fear. Right? And the true spirituality doesn't do that. It never allows this excuses for fears. So it doesn't allow you to keep on excusing your own fear all the time. It wants you to confront it. It wants you to deal with it and address it emotionally. Yeah, it's good. Anything else you can? There was grief in there too, wasn't there?
Yes.
So what does true spirituality do with grief? Any ideas? Well, so it allow grief. Grief is a healing emotion, yes? Most people who have been involved in any type of psychology would know that once you get to the grieving stage, that's when you get to the healing stage. So true spirituality would allow grief. It wouldn't be always trying to shut down grief, always trying to make the grief go away. It would allow the grief so that the person fully experiences the grief and then they're over it. Does that make sense? Yep. Good.
I just wanted to ask about, wouldn't it allow all emotions? Because some religions don't even allow joy. It's not a... So, it's, there's joy somewhere in there as well, isn't there?
Yes, it will allow all emotions, but it will not pander to all emotions. Can you see a difference? So, for example, it will allow fear, but it will not pander to fear. So it will not respond to fear in a negative way. It will always respond in a loving manner. So it allows all emotion, but it does not always embrace the emotion in the sense of following it to be truthful. It allows the emotion to be felt without pandering to the emotion, without living in the emotion in many cases. So for example, if we're living in grief and 10 years later we're still grieving and 20 years later we're still grieving, there's something wrong, right? Because true spirituality would heal us. If the grieving process was real, it should heal us. So if we're still grieving 20 years later, there's something wrong. There's some kind of unlovingness in there that's caused us to still grieve 20 years later. We find that a lot of people feel quite confronted by that. The fact that you should, if you're following through on a truly spiritual path, you will get over things. Emotionally get over things. Not intellectually, but emotionally you will get over things. And true spirituality, that's a good mark of true spirituality when you can see somebody's getting over the grief they have, or getting over the shame, not living in the shame. I've known many people who had been involved in child abuse when they were young, and many of them have gone to therapists and so forth for long periods of time, but they're still not over the grief of their child abuse. And that tells me that something is going wrong with the process. Because after a while, once we go through the proper process, we will definitely get over it completely. We'll be able to even relate the whole event, without grieving the events and without feeling any more emotion about the events. So we'll remember the events without feeling the emotions. Yeah.
So is it really that joy is a natural progression or a natural result?
Yeah, I feel joy is going to be a natural result of true spirituality, whereas the natural result of pseudo-spirituality is often the opposite to that. You know, a lot of difficult emotions, painful experiences, stagnation, a feeling of, I can't really find any answer, so a feeling of hopelessness. A lot of those feelings are associated with what I'd call pseudo-spirituality. Yeah. Matt, you would like to say? We were...
Just on that one, AJ.
Yep.
It says that you're saying that it allows grief, and 20 years of grief is too long, but it doesn't have a time limit on how much grief you need to feel, does it?
No, it doesn't have a time limit, but the fact is that if we're not changing on a particular emotion, then we're not actually getting to the real emotion. So there's got to be something else happening.
Wouldn't say you've got a week to feel the grief and you're done.
No, it wouldn't do that. No. It wouldn't say you've got a week and then it should be over and done with. But it also wouldn't be 5 years later going, why are you still grieving about that? Like there's something wrong if you're still grieving about that 5 years later. Something's not coming out of you. There's some belief system that's out of harmony with truth inside of you if you're still grieving about exactly the same thing 5 years later, for example. Yeah. And that applies even if there is a death of some kind, of a friend or a loved one. If you're still grieving it 5 years later, there's got to be some false belief that's driving the grief that you need to look at. So, for example, a lot of people grieve most of their life after they lose a loved one because they don't believe very strongly in any form of life after death. That's one of the main reasons why we grieve, because we feel it's hopeless now, we've lost them forever. And that's a false belief too. False beliefs always create pain. And if we're constantly grieving, then often it means that we're locked in a false belief. Yeah? And we do need to address that. We need to have a look at that belief. So sometimes we prefer to have that belief than a different belief that would actually relieve us from all grief.
Just on that same point then, would it be right to say that true spirituality then gives us the tools and support that we need to manage these range of emotions?
Yes, although I wouldn't say manage them, it's more release them. It's sort of like the desire to manage emotion comes very much from the intellect, whereas the desire to release them comes from this soul-based feeling that you can release them and be safe through the process of doing so. So I would say that it gives you the tools to be safe through the process of release of the emotions rather than sort of managing the emotion. Yeah. Yep. Okay.